All right, folks, as I was saying, I've got to find some news to report and all of that. One of the things that we do know that is going on is, of course, the confirmation hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson. And a lot of folks are definitely saying that it is going quite well. They expect that she will be the next Supreme Court justice and all of that, even though there are some folks that are asking about some interesting questions and all like along those lines. Because apparently, recently, one of the congressmen was asking what her faith was and things in that particular pocket. Wanted to know what her faith was and what she was practicing in that regards. And I do know that there have been some concerns about the way that she handled the whole situation with Guantanamo Bay and other things. But everybody that I'm talking to seems to think that it is pretty much a done deal that she will get confirmed and all of that. Senator Lindsey Graham on Tuesday grew increasingly competitive in his line of questioning, asking President Biden's Supreme Court nominee about her religious faith, her defense of the Guantanamo Bay prisoners, and whether she was aware of what he said were left wing attacks on his preferred nominee to the court. Graham has been seen as a swing GOP vote on Jackson, given his support for previous Democratic judicial nominees, but he has signaled he is likely to vote no on this nomination. The Republican senator has also made it clear he disliked Democratic questioning during confirmation hearings for former President Trump's Supreme Court nominees and has repeatedly sought to underscore a double standard in how nominees from different presidents are treated. But everybody, like I said, that I've talked to has been saying that she's been doing a good job of answering the questions and all along those lines. But of course, we'll hear from the other panelists and see what they think about this. And of course, we do know that there is some conflicts going on in Russia between them and the Ukraine and all along those lines. So just to give you a little bit more context about what was said, when she responded, she is a non denominational Protestant. Graham then asked, could you fairly judge a Catholic? So definitely there seems to be a lot of stuff going on in that regards. And we do know that Amy Comet Barrett's Catholic faith did come up in questions as all. And by the way, there's some talk that, remember there was talk about packing courts and all of that, but now they're saying that that might not even be an issue because they are saying that we may get a second judicial nominee and all of that because they are mentioning the fact that it is possible that we have another justice that is not feeling all that well. That being, of
Thomas. Yep.
course, Clarence Thomas. So that is that possibility as well. So, Chris, what is your thoughts about what I just said and all along those lines? I'd love to hear your thoughts about the nomination and how it's going. Because, like I said, everybody I've talked to, and I've talked to some people in the political spectrum, and they've all said that they pretty much consider it a done deal. And like I said, when I was talking on one of our other shows not that long ago, they were even mentioning the fact that if it is a case that Clarence Thomas doesn't make it or decides to retire or it doesn't have any more existence on life and everything, that Biden may get a second one. And there are some other ones that are also getting up there in age. So who knows? Maybe even though everybody complains about his age, he may get two or three nominees. But I was just wondering what your thoughts are in that regards. And of course, we'll get to some other world news as well.
Yeah, Mark, I'm going to make a prediction. This is, a great prediction is one will happen. That makes me a great forecaster, right? But let's see, let me go back. Let's see, Ketanji Brown Jackson will be the next Supreme Court justice. There you go. I've made my prediction.
Okay.
There's no doubt in my mind, and and I have watched some of the confirmation hearings, and I'll tell you. I got to tell you the truth, Mark. When she was first brought up and whatever else, I thought, I don't know. Maybe she's not going to do that well in the confirmation hearings, whatever else. She is doing, and I'm a Republican and I'm a conservative. And let me tell you something. She has impressed me all the way through these hearings. I mean, if I were a senator, I'd be sitting back going, why are we giving this individual such a hard time? Just let's get through this thing. Let's get the vote done on the judicial panel, and let's move her into the full population and get her in, because she's good. She's really good. The one thing I love about her is the fact that every time they talk about sentencing, a lot of people don't understand this. Let me tell you, if any of our audience is ex-military, and if they were a squadron section commander, at the age of 23, I was basically put as judge and jury on many an individual that came in. I had to say whether or not they were going to go to court martial, whether or not they were going to go get an Article 15 non-judicial punishment. All these things were my decision at the age of 23. I had no legal training. I knew UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. Let me tell you something. Unless somebody's in that chair and they're a judge, they have no idea the manner of judgment that has to go through that. They have to read. They have to make sure that they have to figure out that is this justice or injustice, and how is this going to work? And they have to take both sides. It's just an amazing thing. And she did the thing I loved about it was every time they brought up sentencing, especially Republicans, what do you think about this sentencing? Why about 17 months? What's all this? Blah blah blah. And she goes, "Hey, I just go by what the Congress says is sentencing protocols. I go with that." And it is absolutely amazing. And instead of being like knocked down, they come back at her. And it's like, look, she's going to just throw it back at you because you're Congress. You make the laws. She interprets the law. And she's a constitutionalist. She's an originalist. I mean, she says that. Now, whether she does that or not on the bench, I don't know. But that's what she said. She said, "Hey, look, we have to figure out what the original writers said." I just what she does on the bench again may be totally different from her confirmation hearings, but I am totally and completely impressed by this individual. And like I said, I have no legal training other than the fact that, but I'll tell you, I got to throw. I mean, literally, I got to sentence people. I mean, I used to sit there at Article 15 and actually sentence people. Like I used to sit there and say, "This is what your sentence is going to be." Because if they said that they didn't want a court martial, then it was up to me to literally be the judge, jury, and sentencing individual on that. Sometimes I threw them out of the Air Force. I mean,
speaking of politics, and we are going to bring Sasha up to talk about what's going on globally very shortly and everything. But well, I'm going to get to one of your favorite topics, Nick, and everything, because apparently there's a whole lot of news in the COVID front, including the fact that a lot of folks around the world are lifting restrictions. So South Africa has begun to lift COVID restrictions. So who knows? Maybe we'll see Alexandria May back on the show as she can start traveling and all of that. But it is leaving its indoor mask mandate and all of that. But while they're doing that, coronavirus cases are rising in European nations because restrictions were eased too soon, is what a WHO official has said. And New York City is planning to end its school mask mandate for children under the age of 5. And I know a lot of people were concerned about that being too young and all of that. And Pfizer will send 4 million courses of its COVID field treatment to poorer countries. So U.S. vaccination rates have stalled, with another potential uptick is being expected. So we are saying that a potential uptick could come around. And along those same lines, and speaking of the courts, a judge on New York State's highest court could face removal from the bench for failing to comply with the state's COVID vaccination mandate, according to court guidelines as state officials. So Jenny Rivera, an associate judge on the State Court of Appeals, has participated remotely in the court's activities since the fall when the state court system's vaccination mandate took effect and unvaccinated employers were barred from court facilities. She is now one of 4 state judges who faces referral to the state's Commission on Judicial Conduct, according to a person familiar with the process. And definitely the commission could move to admonish Judge Rivera or remove her from the bench. So just 61-year-old judge is possibly facing being removed, and she was nominated back in 2013 by former Governor Andrew Cuomo and confirmed by the state Senate to a 14-year term. So it just sounds like she is being one of those folks that doesn't want to get the vaccination, and I'm going to try to find out why, but it says since September, court employees have had the chance to either get vaccinated or apply for a religious or medical exemption. Monday marked the end of the review process for those applications. So maybe she replied and all of that. But Lucien Chalfin, a spokesman for New York's Unified Court System, said that about 1,300 people had requested religious or medical exemptions, and about half were granted. Actually, I have a friend of mine in California that's been facing some similar kind of situations because they are definitely not for the vaccine. They definitely have some things from their own family history and other things that have caused them not to be the biggest fan. And of course, their job is trying to force their hand and things along those nature. And I do think that they may be taking it to the legal matter and seeing if they can find a way to exercise their what they feel are their rights and all along those lines. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out and things along those lines. But just lastly, not about the judge, but about South Africa. South Africa will begin lifting COVID-19 restrictions on today. Today being Wednesday, President Cyril Ramaphosa said on Tuesday in an address that marked the start of what he called a new era in the country's fight against the pandemic. Masks will no longer be required outdoors in South Africa, but will be continue to be required in public indoor spaces, including shops, offices, and public transportation. Indoor and outdoor venues that require proof of vaccination or a negative test no more than 72 hours old will be allowed to fill up to 50% of their capacity. Venues without such requirements must continue to adhere to the existing limits of 1,000 people indoors and 2,000 people outdoors. That's a whole lot of people, and the
Yeah.
maximum capacity at funerals will double. So you can have 200 attendees from 100. It used to be 100, now you can have 200.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to just weigh in on the Supreme Court. Okay.
Yes, please.
Because I'm probably one of the few panelists that is actually licensed before the United States Supreme Court. And I've been licensed before the Supreme Court for many years, and have actually taken a case before the United States Supreme Court, which only one out of 100 attorneys actually get licensed before the U.S. Supreme Court. 1 out of 1,000 take a case there. So I'm one of the 1,000 that are there. A couple of interesting things if you're before the Supreme Court. First of all, they don't allow photographs, so I can never show you, okay, this is what the Supreme Court looks like. Okay, you can't photograph inside the building. Number two, if you're licensed before the Supreme Court like I am, I get to sit up front with the justices, not at the top looking this way, but they have a whole section, literally, that if you're licensed before the Supreme Court, you can sit close to the judges, but you have to be licensed before the Supreme Court, which means you have to be an attorney, admitted. Then the gallery sits behind you. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. If you ever happen to want to go before the Supreme Court, I could take Chris, but Chris is going to have to sit in the back. I get to sit up in the front. Yes, Chris, just let you know. All right. Another thing is, I got to listen to some of the exchange between Tom Cotton and Conchoni Brown. It was hilarious.
It was, wasn't it?
For any intelligent person. Here's some of the questioning. Justice Brown, do you know how many assaults get unreported every year in the United States? And she goes, no, I don't. Frankly, who does? No one does. Well, there were 44%. This is Tom Cotton. By the way, let's give some background on Tom Cotton. I just looked up. I thought he was an idiot. Seriously. I was going, did this guy have an IQ over 100?
Actually, he's a pretty smart guy.
And actually, he's a pretty smart guy. He actually did go to Harvard undergraduate and also Harvard Law School and graduated cum laude. But yesterday, if you just took the transcripts out and you ran it through, you'd say this guy's IQ is probably 80. Okay, seriously, Tom Cotton, your IQ is 80 yesterday. Okay, just because you're a good chess player doesn't mean you play chess good all the time. Okay, so the thing
there's some chess players that don't do all that great.
What percentage, Mark, what percentage of the people? He goes, well, it's 44%. Are you for or against more people getting away with assaults? And she goes, well, she had a good answer. I like the justice system to play out. That answer yes or no, and I'm going like, well, what is that? And as you go through that, they went over this, and she went over it correctly. There was a change in sentencing. She reduced this drug guy down to 10. The reason why she has to keep it equal before the law. In other words, if I am a drug dealer and Chris is a drug dealer, they have what they call sentencing guidelines. Let's say it's 10 years. 10 years for me, 10 years for him. But Chris was convicted 3 years ago when the sentencing guidelines were 20. So Chris is in for the same crime I'm in for 20 and I'm in for 10. She reduced the person's level down to 10, which is the correct thing to do, Mark.
Yes.
Sasha and everybody. Tom Cotton questioned it like, oh, this is a bad thing in Arkansas. Well, let me tell you something, Tom. Okay, by the way, we have a candidate for the U.S. Senate and a candidate for Congress coming on, not this show, but other shows next week. Right. Let me tell you something, Tom. Okay, you went to Harvard. You graduated from Harvard. You're an embarrassment to that school and every other school by asking that line of questioning when you knew or should have known that you have to have equal sentencing guidelines between the same offense that's created, especially if it's a federal offense. Now, state offenses can be different, okay, but federal is what we're talking about here. The reason why is if Chris goes to Las Vegas and gambles, he walks. If I gamble here in North Carolina, I go to jail. It's because state laws are different. But sinking to this 80, this IQ level of 80, where the state of Arkansas has one of the highest illiteracy rates in the United States. He needs to go clean up his own bloody state. High illiteracy rate, 20%, almost 20% of the people in Arkansas are bloody illiterate. And one of the highest poverty rates in the United States. He needs to go back home and go to work and fix the state of Arkansas, not be on the national stage, which he was yesterday, embarrassing graduates from Harvard, embarrassing the United States of America by asking such a line of question. And too bad he's not on this show, but I love this show because I can say things like that. We have the first.
We'll have to get him on the show and all of that. I was actually just looking up statistics about
What assault
statistics. I was looking up statistics actually about our other favorite topic, COVID, because apparently North Carolina is still a hotspot. Because I was seeing that North Carolina was listed as a hotspot along with Texas and California and a number of other places. And then I happened to look down here and saw that we're only at 60% of the folks being vaccinated. So there are 40% that are not vaccinated, and Texas is actually, we're just a little bit below Texas because Texas is at 61% that are fully vaccinated and all of that, and Arizona is at 61% too. West Virginia, Steve's favorite place, is at 57%. So I was going like, wait a minute. So there are a couple of states that are not quite at that herd immunity rate and all of that, but I did not realize that North Carolina was
good news for Chris.
Here we go. Yeah. They've gone down.
The death rate today was only 1,002, and because it's so low
from 1,800.
From 1,800, which means it's
amazing.
Only annualized to 365,000 people. Chris, okay.
You're an investor, Nick. You're an investor. Would you do that to your investment people? Would you sit there and say,
sure,
hey, if you go with me, you're going to make $1 million because I annualized that? Okay, of course you wouldn't.
First of all, I'm not securities licensed. Number two, people that are securities licensed never get on our show because everything they say or do has to be approved by their broker dealer, and the broker dealers aren't going to approve everything they say.
Right.
So my business partner never goes on my shows because he doesn't have that freedom of speech and luxury that I have. So
speaking of freedom and speech and luxury, I would like to, and I hate to hijack this thing, but I want to hear Sasha talk about Hungary. I heard Hungary has stated that to the European Union that, hey, we're not going to have anything to do with these sanction things. We're not going to do any of that stuff. We're going to continue to trade with Russia because we love, we're trying to.
And before he gets to Hungary, because I was actually going to bring back us around full circle to Russia as well, because apparently Russia on earlier today condemned what it called a reckless Polish proposal to send international peacekeepers into Ukraine and warned that it could lead to a direct clash between Russian and NATO forces. Poland said last week or last Friday it would formally submit a proposal for a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine at the next NATO summit. So I would like to hear about Hungary and his thoughts about that, but I also want to know, do these peacekeeping forces ever work? Because like I said, I see them all the time going around the country, and I'm wondering, do they ever really work, or do they actually stop whatever the conflict is, and are they successful, and are you
Korea has peacekeepers. They still have peacekeepers. And now they're backed by the U.S. military, which is like, backed by a good security. But basically, yeah, there's peacekeepers there in Korea. So they do work in some places. They don't work in Burma. They didn't work in Rwanda. They didn't work in Nigeria. But some places they work. It has to be backed up with some stuff, though.
Well, this Hungary thing, I'd be very interested to hear what Sasha has to say
about
Hungary. Are they backing the USSR? I mean, Russia. Excuse me.
Basically, yeah.
Basically, all happened in Hungary is the repeat of a rise to power of all these autocratic regimes around the world headed by former US President Donald Trump, who is no longer in power and hopefully will never be in power. And his actual place is obviously in jail, and hopefully sooner or later he'll get there. There is no doubt about that. He's a real hardcore
I like Trump.
criminal. He was obviously developed by KGB into area of interest since 1987, believe it or not. Although in 87 was
Wow.
his trip to Moscow. It's his first trip to Moscow was in 87, but he was involved with KGB operatives since 79, where he bought to save some money for his one of the hotel projects. He bought 200 TV sets from the Russian-owned shop, and then operative of that shop was obviously one of the KGB people, and they actually Trump asked why he selected this Russian shop, because they gave him actually terms that he didn't have to pay anything, no down payment, nothing, for 30 days. So Trump loved that deal. The only thing is that the owner of the shop told him, but it's, remember, 30, not 31 day. It is 30 days. Hello, Mr. Trump. Did you hear me? So Trump, being a thug himself, he wanted to be all his life involved with his thugs. If you look at his real estate projects, those who were failed, those who were just nothing but basically the criminal projects which were fleecing investors and separating them from their money without any intent to ever build anything there. One of them is in Toronto, by the way. So he was operating always with Russians in cahoot. Everybody knew what each one is doing. And if you look at the residents of his marquee projects in Miami and Sunny Isle, all of them are Russian mafia and all Russian sympathizers and all that stuff. So if Putin wants ever liberate Florida, that's where he will start. His people, his huge base is in Miami, Sunny Isle project, and that's where he has to start liberating Florida. On the north, he has to get finally Alaska back to Russia. And so this little thing in Hungary, come on, Hungary just has to be kicked out of NATO and European Union and get into blockade from the West, and let's North Korea, Russia, and Hungary trade among themselves and sell all their goods to each other. That's really what.
Hey, Sasha, I'm glad you brought up Mr. Trump and everything, because I was actually going to ask Chris a question, because I was actually watching and listening to some friends of mine that are doing some conferences and things along those lines in the virtual space. And one of the things that was brought up was the fact that it was actually a thing about credit reports and credit ways that you should actually clean your record. And one of them, of course, is declaring bankruptcy, and that can clean your credit to some degree, because after 7 years, a lot of that stuff is pretty much taken off your records, as I recall. And I'm not putting it in the exact way that this bigger expert phrased it, but it was kind of this 7-year cleansing.
He froze up.
Whoop.
And every conversation was brought up the fact that one.
He's freezing up. By the way,
He says Clinton, and that's exactly where you get froze.
Well, actually, what happens is that the Russian mafia came in and they destroyed our cybersecurity and took Mark Lee off. So
yeah, exactly.
That's our story, and we stick into it. Speaking about story and sticking to it, because we know our top-rated show right now is your guys' show. It's Russia Ukraine on Vimeo. So the thing is, I guess that's going on again today
on Friday.
Right.
On Friday.
On
Don't forget about the links.
Oh, on Friday. Okay, right. Okay.
Today's financial show at 1
o'clock. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's one of the biggest topics out there is what's going on with the Russia Ukraine. So, can you give us a little bit of an update? We had some calls in from people in the Ukraine, and twice, but then we don't hear from them again. I'm kind of worried about that, because I saw yesterday a building. It looked to be an apartment building Sasha, being blown up by the Russians. In other words, the missiles obviously hit the apartment building. The apartment building was like seaside, just went crumbling down.
Yeah,
Are the
this
Russians
is,
now doing this?
basically, this is exactly
war of
they're
attrition.
doing the same thing. Terror, which is very popular, was a few years ago. It stopped by now. For example, in Israel, Palestinians, they were terrorizing the civil population by blowing buses, cars, and doing indiscriminate killing of civilians. This is exactly what Russians are doing. They are repeating Palestinian tactics in Ukraine. There is a genocide of Ukrainian population. They are discriminately level infrastructure. And, if you're talking about Russia being, the funny thing is, if you think about something interesting, do you know that Russia is a member of United Nations illegally? They have no right to be there. Because when, remember the good old times of Soviet Union, there were 3 members of this area in the United Nations. It was Soviet Union, Ukraine, and Belarus. So when Soviet Union fell apart, Ukraine remained Ukraine, Belarus remains Belarus. Now, Russia is something different. The Soviet Union ceased to exist. There is no longer such a country or even entity of any kind. Now, Russia, as a republic, as same as Ukraine and Belarus, had to go through due process to become a member of United Nations. I'm not saying that it was impossible. Probably they could go. For example, when Yugoslavia fell apart, each country, including Serbia and Croatia and everything else, had to go through due process to become members of United Nations. Russia never went through the due process. So how they can justify to keep a murderous terrorist state as a part of United Nations? Anybody could explain?
Well, yeah, according to one news source, it says the Russian Federation that represents Russia is a member of the United Nations, having taken on the permanent membership after the Soviet Union was dissolved in 1991.
Wait a moment. Russia is not the Soviet Union, and Soviet Union was not Russia. There are 2 distinct, different entities. So when Soviet Union ceased to exist, does it have, did they write a will that they put their place in the United Nations to Russia? No, they never wrote a will. They just died without a will. So their place became vacant, and Russia could take that place, but not automatically as it did happen. They had to go through the due process, and then never went through the due process. Their status,
well, unless that's questioned, Sasha, unless it's questioned by the other members, forget it. You got to question it.
Well,
Yes,
the thing is, they could have what they call
de
facto membership or de jure membership, which means that just because they haven't gone through the proper process, which may be true, I don't know what the processes are in the United Nations. De facto, they say they've been admitted to the United Nations, Sasha. So,
Nick, won't they have the same concept that we have here with corporations, meaning that they would have been to some degree grandfather claused in, meaning that even
that's what I'm saying
that they were dissolved as a government, but they were never fully.
In other words, you didn't go through the process correctly, but de facto. You're a member of the United Nations.
I have no problem with that. But Nick, think about something else. Okay, so they are a member of United Nations and Security Council, and by the way, they were even admitted to G7. And remember, for a few years, it was G8.
Right.
They were accepted in the World Trade Organization. So where are all the stupid grievances that we were not dealt properly?
The thing is, we listen to the West opinion of this, and of course, I think the invasion was incorrect. But then here's Putin's argument. Remember, there's his story, her story, and then there's the truth. His argument was that our friend, who was it, Ronald Reagan, said when Germany was reunified, that If you allow the reunification, NATO will not expand any further toward the east. That's what he said. Okay,
Baker.
That's what Reagan said, or Baker said, as representative of the United States. Here's
Reagan.
what they did. They actually, NATO did go into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania.
Wait a sec, Nick. Wait a sec. How Baker had any rights to talk about NATO? U.S. is nothing but member of NATO. That's it. So he cannot have the policy to say NATO will move west or east or north or south. Who is Baker? He is a politician in the United States. He was, I believe,
I understand the counter arguments, but here's my arguments with Russia in general. They talk about a very poor PR group in Russia. I mean, the thing is, if they have a message, they do a real poor job of getting their message out. And the only thing that we see, the only thing we see from Russia is their infiltration into our systems.
No,
and so the thing is,
the interesting thing is that they have infiltration into the systems, including systems that we don't always acknowledge that they are controlling and all of that. Because like I said, we talk about China and TikTok and how they're controlling some of our internet and everything. There's some very major players in that whole world of social media, from what I understand, in Russia as well, including some of the newer developed ones that are coming out now. But we don't always think about the history of who's running those networks and all of that. I am going to bring in really quickly our good friend Steve and the other host and all of that, because Steve is back after his New York trip. So we want to hear how New York was and all of that. But before Steve gets to that, I was actually going to bring up another political power, or they could be a political power, because they have said that they are on the way to getting a nuclear deal. And everybody's worried about this World War III coming from Russia. What about the possibility that it could be coming from the Middle East? Because the Iranian foreign minister, Hussein Amir-Abdollahian, and I probably mispronounced that, said on Wednesday that the Islamic Republic and world powers are closer than ever to reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. So it sounds like that could be some things going on between Iran, Syria, and other Arab countries. So are we worried that maybe it's not coming from the eastern part of the world in the sense of Russia or even from Korea, but it might be coming from one of these Muslim countries that might also have this kind of nuclear power and have had some very interesting relations with the U.S. and the West in the past. So are you worried at all, Chris, about the Iranians getting nuclear power?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, I realize that Russia is becoming a very, very big imperial monster here. And I get that. And they have succeeded, into invasions and all that. But let me tell you something, Iran, I do not trust Iran. I do not trust Iran more than I don't trust the French. That tells you something. I think the Stuxnet virus that was stupidly by the Iranians. It was basically on a USB drive, and somebody shoved it into a computer. Next thing you know, all their factories and everything else, dropped stuff. I mean, it was a problem, overheated and whatever else. We have to make sure we do that. We have to make sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. Absolutely not. I mean, if they develop a nuclear weapon, remember, Israel is a nuclear power. They do have nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tell you that Israel will never let Iran have a nuclear weapon. If it becomes that close, they're going to do the same thing they did against the Osirak nuclear weapons facility in Iraq. They're going to go in and they're going to bomb it, and they're going to walk out of there. And I'm going to tell you, we do not want that to happen. The U.S. does not want that to happen. So I mean, it was. I can't. We're so focused. You know what I call ourselves? You know what the U.S. is? Balloon squeezers. You get a balloon and there's a little pop up, and you push that down, a little pop up here, and push that down, a little pop up here. That's what we are. We're balloon squeezers. We try to figure whack-a-moles, whatever you want to call it. We always try to push these things back in, and another one pops up. And basically what happens is I swear to God, we can't sit there and focus on two things at a time. We're like, almost like ADHD. We got to focus on one thing at a time. And like, okay, right now it's Russia, Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine. We got to go into Europe. We got to do this. What about the Far East? What about Iran? What about all this stuff? Come on.
Well,
You
yeah,
got
I hear you.
specialists. Let's
I
move
hear
it.
you, Chris. And I was actually going to add to that, and then wanted to hear from Steve about this as well, because apparently, as this is going on, the Abu Dhabi's Crown Prince spoke recently, as in yesterday, with the Azerbaijan president about the global energy market in light of the Ukraine crisis, and he stressed that the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, is keen on energy security globally and the stability and the balance of the energy markets. That's what their state news agency WAM reported on Tuesday. So Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan also discussed with the Azerbaijan's president Ilham Aliyev bilateral relationships, especially in the fields of economy, trade, energy, in addition to a number of regional and international issues of common concern. So it does sound like maybe the Middle East is trying to do what we've been saying we want to do in the United States and Canada and some of our Western neighbors, and actually having a unified structure and things that are dealing with the infrastructure and definitely things along those lines. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that, because definitely we're always hearing about the infrastructure conversation, this global energy situation, as well as supply issues and all of that. And it does sound like some of the other countries are being a little bit more proactive in dealing with things than we have been here in the United States, and I would argue other parts of the Western world as well. But what are your thoughts, Steve?
Well, I think, first of all, it's great to be back. And I'm going to save my New York truck for my closing monologue, since I had some technical issues again. So I apologize. And I had a great trip to New York, but I'm going to end my monologue with that, because I think, to me, it sort of signifies where we're headed in this pandemic. And I feel like a different person today now that I'm back. But first of all, in terms of nuclear weapons, I think it's always scary with Iran to have nuclear capability. And, I think it goes to this whole idea of these autocracies and dictatorships that are rising, all over the world. And I actually got a book while I was in the airport by Malcolm Gladwell saying, I think it's called Talking to Strangers. And it's all about the history of the world, and it brings in some political stuff. I just started reading it about Neville Chamberlain and his meeting with Hitler. It talks about Montezuma meeting with Cortez, and how many of the disasters in the world occurred with people who were just miscommunicating and not understanding each other. And I think that it all comes down to perspective. And what is your question, Mark? I mean,
you were answering, and I was just mentioning that perspective, and definitely how we're dealing with the infrastructure. I did want to circle back to something that Sasha mentioned earlier and everything, which is this whole G7, G8, G20 summits and all of that. And earlier today, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, said he plans to attend the G20 summit in Indonesia later this year. And he got an endorsement from China. So China has said that they are backing him coming to it as well. He received valuable backing from Beijing on Wednesday in a pushback to suggestions by some members that Russia should be barred from the group. So they are saying that Russia definitely should be barred for what they're doing and everything, and U.S. and other allies are mulling barring Russia over their invasion of Ukraine, and the move could face vetoes from others in the G20, according to sources. And what China has said is that Russia is an important member of a big economies group. So definitely it sounds like this G20 summit that Mr. Putin might be trying to make it there. Of course, that could be an opportunity if we're going to have one of those missions that we were talking about with food and everything, to actually do what you have suggested should be done to him anyway. So he's going to be at a big event. So that could be something, but y'all don't hear that from me, because I am not a spy and I don't know anything about how that works.
Well,
hear that from me.
Speaking about infrastructure, I will be live from PBS on Friday. But I did have a meeting yesterday with Congressman David Price and Congresswoman Deborah Ross to talk about the American Rescue funding for our town of Morrisville and other cities in the state at the League of Municipalities event. And it was very interesting about, it seemed like Congressman Ross, who's the newer Congresswoman, felt more positive about bipartisanship. And David Price seemed a little, he's been there 35, 40 years, that it was a little bit harder to get things done. but it's very important to get the Build Back Better through in terms of, tomorrow I'll be hosting a press conference at the General Assembly talking about Medicaid expansion, but Medicaid expansion, lowering prescription drug costs, more affordable housing, more clean energy solutions. These are all part of the Build Back Better. But one thing that came up is, can we get shovel-ready projects ready? How quickly we'll be able to see the progress of this infrastructure bill. So hopefully, I saw a commitment from both the congressman leaders, North Carolina, that they were working already on getting some funding into North Carolina to help fund some projects. So that to me was very positive, right? And with Judge Ketanji Brown, we're going to talk about that on Friday.
Yeah, we mentioned a little bit about that earlier while you were trying to get in and everything.
I think her experience as a public defender is something that is unique in her qualifications, because she didn't spend as much time as a corporate lawyer as many others, about 7 years, but really had that experience of defending poor people. But she's really been on the attack by the Republicans. And so I think she's going to get the nomination, but they certainly haven't made it a good experience. But and of course, we hope Justice Thomas gets better, but this will be interesting if President Biden gets another opportunity, which makes these off-year elections all the more important for Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy in terms of making sure that they block things. And we'll talk about China on Friday as well in terms of their handling of the war in Ukraine and what does it really mean for China. I think if Russia wins, then I think Taiwan will be afraid. I think if Russia loses, I think China will benefit from looking at a weaker economy in Russia and say, look, we have all the more reason to become a superpower.
No doubt about that and everything. And I definitely want to hear what Sasha has to think about the G20. But before I get to that, because I did have that computer glitch earlier, I did not hear whether Chris had answered my question earlier about bankruptcy and whether that is a good defense and all of that, because I had mentioned about Donald Trump and his record-breaking bankruptcies and all of that, but I didn't know whether you'd had a chance to answer whether that can sometimes be a good strategy to clear your financial records and all along those lines as a data analyst, and what your thoughts are of his bankruptcies.
Well, the bankruptcy as a tool is something that's used by even corporate giants. I mean, if you take a look at some of the best business people in the world, somewhere along the line they've had a bankruptcy, right? So you take a look at that and say, okay, is it good to reset? Now the thing is that when you reset, you're not allowed to have any credit. You can't have anything at that point in time. Normal people, you can't have credit. You can't do anything. You can't build. You can't have anything at this point in time. All you're doing is reorganizing. Now there's separate, and Nick would know this better than me, but I think there are separate chapters to bankruptcy. It's like chapter 6 and chapter 9. One is like reorganization only, where basically you go in and I'm going to reorganize, and because I'm going to reorganize, that will make my company more efficient, and therefore it will get me out of this bankruptcy situation. And then I think it's chapter 9 or whatever it is that you're bankrupt. Like I'm done. I can't pay any more debts. I'm bankrupt. You can't collect from me. This is what's going to happen. I pay everything cash, and life goes on, that type of thing. So it is very much a tool to be used, with discretion. The idea that during the Trump Clinton, now understand, Sasha, I really do appreciate, your expression about Trump. But understand he's no longer the president. You've said that he's no longer in power. This is all Biden all the time. I think when Trump says something, people just, I know I do. I just ignore the guy. I move on and whatever else. You were president. You're no longer the president. Move on. But getting down to Trump, when Trump was having the debate with Hillary Clinton, she said, I can't believe it. You put down, all this expenses stuff, and basically you took a loss on all the businesses. I think it was like $92 million worth of losses, whatever it was. And she said, what do you think about that? And he goes, I think it was pretty smart. And she goes, oh yeah, that's pretty smart. Hey, that was smart. If you're going to take the tax law and throw it back in somebody's face, I'm good with that. Trust me. The IRS are probably sitting back going, he can't do that. And somebody said, oh yeah, he can. If that's an expense, if the expenses override the revenue, You can take the whole thing as a loss, move on. Now, you can't do that every year. I mean, after a certain period of time, the business becomes a hobby. But the bottom line is that what he did, yeah, if his expenses outweighed his revenue, yep, he ends up in a loss, and you owe no taxes.
Also,
So-
Chris, in law school, they don't call it bankruptcy, just for the edification of the panel. It's called corporate reorganization, which is usually what they call Chapter 11. And it's and what you were looking at is Chapter 7, which is a complete liquidation. And then there's the separate Chapter 9, which is for municipal reorganization. In other words, and in law school they call it reorganization, not bankruptcy, because what you're really doing is you're changing the composition of the debt structure. Or in some cases, a corporation could get hooked in with a larger debt structure than really the economic realities of today take place. So they file, and some of these are prepackaged, and especially 11, the corporation will file 11 and be out within a month because they've already renegotiated. It's a place where they can renegotiate their debt to equity structures. So what Trump really did is he filed for corporate reorganizations, not what they call 7, which is a complete liquidation of the assets.
But apparently he said
With that-
apparently he
with
set
that
some
in
sort of
mind,
record in
okay.
doing that.
With that in mind,
I'm sure.
okay, I got to repeat. Medicare will be bankrupt in 2026, in about 3 years from now. And our politicians completely ignore this fact. It's like this, hey, we're not going to look at it because it's 3 years from now. And then the Center for Budget and Priorities and Public Priorities came up with this statement. This was Washington's typical response. We're not going to be bankrupt. Don't listen to people who are saying that. We're just not going to be able to pay our bills out of the Social Security Trust Fund.
Hey,
Okay.
Nick,
Now,
I hear you. I hear you, but I got to get to one of your favorite topics. I got to get to another one of your favorite topics really quickly, because you are always talking about education and the fact of our education system being corrupt. And I agree with you that, like the politicians, not Steve, but other politicians, and like a lot of other folks, there is some corruption going on left, right, all the different sides and everything. But one of the things that we oftentimes talk about, and I agree with you that the education system needs reforming, but we talk about what kind of reform it needs. And I was actually listening to a speech person recently, and they brought up a good point about a historical figure, namely namely one of the Rockefellers. I can't remember whether it was Nelson or one of the other ones. I think it was one of the older Rockefellers. But he was at a school, and when he was at this particular school, they were asking him like some very basic question. I don't remember what the question was, but let's just say hypothetically, it was like, what does your car run on? It runs on gas. It was like something that anybody should know and everything along those lines. And apparently he did not know the answer. And like I said, I made up the gas. I'm sure he knew gas, but whatever it was very basic. He didn't know the answer and all of that. And apparently he was getting a lot of laughter from these students. And they might have been high school or college kids, because they were like, you're the richest man in the world. Why do you not know this? Why do you not know these facts and everything? And he sat there and he looked at him and he gave him basically what amounted to a mic drop. He said, I have people that know those things, and I don't need to know those things and everything, because I have folks that know that information. So I don't need to know whatever this very basic knowledge was that he was supposed to have, that everybody's supposed to have. So I was wondering your thoughts about that, because there are some people that have that mentality that are in our elite. They have this mentality of,
that's true.
I don't need to
I mean, also there's a difference between knowledge and intelligence. For those who show up our Media Monday show, we actually have one of the most intelligent person in the world who shows up, Rick Rosner.
Right.
And if you don't know him, then you need to Google his name, Rick Rosner. Okay. And he shows up. But see, the thing is, it's almost like this, having a raw calculator, and his IQ has been measured over and over again at over 190, which, by the way, is a pretty high IQ between me and the stars. But having the pure ability to calculate, it's like I've got a computer that can calculate very quickly, and Rick can obviously do that. But that doesn't mean you have the information fed into the computer to do that. And then when you're dealing with people, it doesn't, then you have this complete mismatch, because the thing is, people are and can be irrational. So all of a sudden you're sitting there going like the Tom Cotton, I don't know if you saw that. I was going, this is the stupidest thing I ever heard. And unfortunately, Judge Jackson couldn't say, That's because she's trying to get their appointment.
Yeah.
She couldn't go tell Tom Cotton. That's the most stupidest question I've ever heard in my life. Because she won't get the nomination. So instead, she answered the
She
question.
could not say that at all. But the flip side of that, and this is going to be an interesting observation, is that some of the smartest people in the world also are not necessarily the most adept in the sense of being
Socially
adapt and all of that. I mean, Rick
Mark, what
Roster
you're saying
is
is
an
absolutely
example
no
to some
question.
degree, and
Absolutely
everything.
no question.
I've been
Right.
arguing
You're
myself to
correct.
some degree and everything, and definitely we saw that with Einstein, and definitely
Right.
some other folks that are in that kind of category
Mhm.
as well. So there's some
No,
folks that
because they really, what happens, their tolerance level is really poor for
Right.
incredibly stupid statements. Like I listened to that with Tom Cotton, Cantoney Jackson debate, or whatever it was, and I'm sitting there. My tolerance level was really poor for that. I was impressed that she's able to have that composure to answer these incredibly stupid questions. And of course, the commentators didn't put back on Tom Cotton. Why are you asking incredibly stupid questions?
Nick, they're not stupid questions. They're what people want to know. They're what
People
people want
wanna
to
know.
know. If people want to know this, that's not stupid. Stop calling it stupid.
Yeah, because I thought the old saying is there is no such thing as a
I gotta
stupid
pick up a
question. I don't know that I always buy that, but I've heard that in debates and I've heard that in speeches where people will tell you there is no such thing as a stupid question. Now, we know that there have been some times even here on this show that definitely Sasha and others have called out and been like, Mark, that was not the greatest question. That was not the greatest observation and all of that. So we do know that that can happen also. But I do want to get back to the serious topic of the G20. I've definitely enjoyed some of this other conversation we've been having. But do you think there's any possibility, Sasha, that Russia and Putin are actually going to be at this G20 in Indonesia?
I think that they should be expelled from G20, so it should be G19. There is no place among civilized nations, which most of the G20 are, and Russia has no place at the table or even under the table. They have to be banned from any meetings, international. They have to be deadlocked into their territory and let them just be there and slowly die. That's basically all what has to happen. It has to become giant North Korea. No financial, technological, sports, culture exchanges, nothing. Isolate them completely and let them rot there, to be just same as North Korea. That's basically.
I hear you. And Chris, I'm going to come back to something that I just saw in the news, and this was from today as well. And I want to know what you think about this, because this is a military question. But apparently, there was a commander of NATO's quick reaction forces that said that NATO countries must make up for post-Cold War cuts to military equipment to give the alliance the capacity to respond swiftly to a conflict, and all of that is particularly if they're going to be responding to conflicts like what's going on in Russia and everything else. But I just wondered what your thoughts are about this, because apparently he just came out with this statement earlier today.
Well, first of all, we used to conduct, I don't know if we do anymore or not, I'll have to look it up, but we used to conduct, every year, what an exercise called Reforger. And Reforger stood for Return of Forces to Germany. So basically what we did was we would take we take transport aircraft with tanks on them in different areas, and we'd take them to Europe. We'd land them in Germany, and we would have exercises with the Germans and with the different NATO troops. And then we had other exercises called Display Determination, which was in the southern area with Italy, Greece, Turkey, and those areas. And AF North area, Armed Forces Northern Tier, which was Norway and all the areas in the north. So we did a lot of things from the standpoint of taking the equipment there, and then we'd return it to the United States after the exercise was over with. It would just help us to figure out how long it took to get forces from the U.S. into Germany. Now, there's also the Southern European Task Force, which are called CTAF, which I don't know if it still exists or not, but I think it does. It used to be in Vicenza, Italy. And basically what we did was we put airborne troops there, 82nd or 101st, and they would supplement NATO troops in the Southern European area to be able to rapidly respond to any type of issues that would happen in that region. And we had the same thing up in the northern area too. So I think the amount of budget that has been levied to forces in Europe is they try to separate that from the amount of money that they give to NATO itself. So we give money to the U.S. forces to be able to do what needs to be done to be able to make that work. Now, as far as giving more money, that's really up to the budget. That's up to the budget people, the purse strings in Congress. If they've decided that they're going to increase the amount of money to the Department of Defense, then that will in turn give more money to those troops that are levied over in that area. So there's a lot of discussion on that whole situation, and I'll tell you, it's not an easy thing. I was part of that Department of Defense budget from a very low level, and we used to wish for things, put a wish list in there. If we got 25% of what we wished for, it was fantastic. So it's that type of, and it's all Congress. That is all Congress. That's what that is.
That makes sense.
Well,
Steve, we need to get to you in New York because we know that this is not
Okay.
that time to
Well,
wrap
I'm
things
sorry,
up, but we need to hear about the New York trip.
I was a little quiet today, so I apologize for that. And we'll also be talking on Friday about kind of the United States policy towards nuclear powers and this kind of the way that we're handling it, which is empowering Ukraine, supplying Ukraine with weapons where they can defend themselves, but they can't take the offensive. And so we might defer to Chris Greco on that, the difference between, for example, defending a no strike zone, which would require bombing. But, we've had that fine line before with how we've dealt with nuclear power, especially with the Cuban Bay Missile Crisis and other things like that. So it's interesting to see the fact that we do have a strategy of dealing with nuclear power in the United States. The question is, are we being successful at it? Or are we being too timid? With that being said, I want to close out today my monologue with my first post-pandemic, or should I say endemic trip. I began my day very scared and nervous last Sunday, as it's the first time I've been away from my wife for 2.5 years. I had butterflies in my stomach as I packed my bags and headed to RDU Airport to take off to LaGuardia, New York City for a business trip. When I got to the airport after having a mask on and getting through security, which wasn't too bad, I ended up running into Tracy Morgan, the comedian, who had just been in North Carolina. This really was a Ferris Bueller day off for me, almost like a Make-A-Wish Foundation, because the day started and had a cup of coffee with him and had like my own comedy show, and then ended up going to New York and found out my hotel was only a mile away from Hamilton, which is why I'm wearing just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. Now, I may not be young, but it was an inspiring Broadway musical, which I've seen for the second time, but I must say, the cast, in my opinion, was better than the cast I saw in Durham. The George Washington was amazing, and I couldn't think of a better time as not only an elected official, but also a media personality to listen and see the musical Hamilton and be inspiring as they raised their glasses to freedom and reminded us that it's something they can never take away. And I think in the world order, we're seeing that with Ukraine. How often forget, after George Washington, we've only had 45 presidents. And it was Washington who so eloquently sang the song One Last Time with Hamilton by his side. If only we could teach others to say goodbye so easily. And then the day went on with a New York pizza, a Reuben, and a wonderful day. And then a day of work in the capital, in the city of New York. I saw businesses open up. I saw people energized and electrified. Some businesses having a hard time opening up or staying open as long as they did. But as I returned back from my trip, I really thought to myself, it really was amazing to be out and about, seeing others enjoy the great city of New York, seeing others return to a new normal that will never quite be what we had before the pandemic. I actually had some car issues today, and I had to, instead of driving all the way to Raleigh, use a Zoom call to get on and use the distance learning technology to work today from home. Before the pandemic, that would have been impossible. I would have had to either spend my day on the phone, leaving messages, trading voicemails. But now we can Zoom and get the work done. The final point I'll make is the time with family. This is something that we are grateful for. The time that we've had to reflect and be with our loved ones, to read more books, to be more aware of our surroundings and more grateful for what we have. These are things that I probably took for granted before the pandemic. And maybe that's why, even though I was only gone for 48 hours, I missed my wife so much more than I would have maybe on a business trip before the pandemic. Maybe these feelings aren't normal, or maybe they are normal. But the fact of the matter is, the world will never be the same. And that was a song that was sung in Hamilton about, how the United States changed the world with this 13 colonies who refused to come back to King George and declared their independence as the Republic of the United States of America. That's my closing thought. Get out there and take your shot like Hamilton. Don't throw away your shot. Our World Edition, we encourage you to share our ideas. And Steve Rao is back from New York, energized and ready for a post-pandemic or endemic life, as many of the restrictions are being lifted. We hope you are safe wherever you are around the world. I will see you Friday live from PBS Studios, as I will actually be at another conference tomorrow. I'll try to get on. And then next week, we have spring break. We'll be back the following week. Elaine Marshall was going to be with us Monday. We'll be rescheduling that. She's the Secretary of State of North Carolina. From our family to yours, be safe wherever you are. And it's an honor to host this great show with my esteemed colleagues. Take your shot.